When I was 22, I thought the night was going to be just another one of those unforgettable evenings with friends. We were in this ridiculously over-the-top club in St. Louis. You know, the kind where the neon lights flicker just enough to make everything feel surreal, and the bass vibrates through your chest like a second heartbeat. It was nearing midnight when I excused myself to use the restroom. I didn't think much of it then, just a quick trip to freshen up before rejoining the fun. But the moment I stepped through the bathroom door, I felt off. Something about the place didn't sit right. It was too quiet, like the music outside was being swallowed by the walls. The air was heavy, almost suffocating. I brushed off the unease and headed to the stall, not realizing I was stepping into something far darker than I could imagine. The restroom was oddly pristine for such a chaotic club, except for this faint smell of bleach mixed with something metallic. I dismissed it, chalking it up to overzealous cleaning. After all, who thinks twice about a restroom at a club? I did my business and placed my phone on the back of the toilet, as I always do. But when I reached for it, my hand slipped on something wet, a puddle I hadn't noticed before. Time seemed to slow as my feet lost grip, and I came crashing down. My forehead slammed against the toilet with a sickening crack. Pain exploded in my head, and I felt warm liquid streaming down my face. I touched my nose, only to pull my hand away and see it coated in blood. But it wasn't just the blood that unsettled me. It was the sticky wetness on the floor that had caused my fall. It wasn't water. It felt thicker. Before I could process what had just happened, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, and heavy. The bathroom attendant appeared, her presence almost ghostly under the harsh fluorescent lights. She was an older woman with a stern face and eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. "You're not going anywhere like that," she said, her voice a strange mix of concern and command. I was too dazed to argue as she grabbed a stack of paper towels and pressed them to my nose. The bleeding wouldn't stop. The metallic tang of blood mixed with the mysterious smell of the restroom made me nauseous. She muttered something under her breath, something I couldn't quite catch, but it sounded ominous. My heart raced as I realized I was completely at her mercy. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My friends, why hadn't they come looking for me? The attendant's eyes followed me every time I moved, her expression unreadable. She wouldn't let me leave, insisting the bleeding needed to stop first. Her hands trembled as she worked, and for a brief moment, I saw something in her gaze. Fear. But fear of what? I asked her if she had seen my friends, but she just shook her head. "They're gone," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Gone? Surely not. They wouldn't just leave me, would they? My chest tightened as the realization sank in. I was alone, stranded in this eerie, too quiet restroom with a stranger whose intentions I could no longer trust. I decided to text my friends, but my phone, where was it? Panic surged through me as I frantically searched the stall and surrounding area. The attendant watched me, her face pale. "It's gone," she said flatly. "Gone? How?" My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Had someone taken it while I was unconscious? Or worse, had it fallen into I didn't even want to think about it. The puddle on the floor, that inexplicable sticky liquid, caught my eye again. In the chaos of the moment, I hadn't truly looked at it. But now, under the harsh light, I noticed its reddish tint. My stomach churned. This wasn't water, and it wasn't just blood from my fall. Something terrible had happened here, and I was smack in the middle of it. Adrenaline took over. I had to get out. Broken nose or not, I wasn't staying in that bathroom a second longer. I pushed past the attendant, ignoring her protests. Her grip on my arm was stronger than I expected, and for a moment I thought she wouldn't let go. But I wrenched free and stumbled out into the hallway. The music from the club seemed distant, muffled, like it was coming from another world. My eyes darted around for my friends, but the crowd was a sea of unfamiliar faces. My head throbbed, and my vision blurred. I finally found the exit and burst onto the landing outside, gasping for air. The cold night hit me like a slap, but it was a relief compared to the suffocating tension of that restroom. I waited for what felt like hours on that landing, hoping my friends would realize I was missing and come back for me. But they didn't. When I finally gathered the courage to return to the club and retrieve my phone, the restroom was different. The puddle was gone. The attendant was gone. It was as if none of it had happened. My friends later claimed they thought I had left with someone else, and we laughed about it the next day. But I knew the truth. Something sinister had unfolded in that restroom, something I couldn't explain. Even now, years later, the memory haunts me. Every time I walk into a restroom alone, I'm reminded of that night and the strange, sticky puddle that nearly became my undoing. Hosting New Year's Eve parties had always been my favorite tradition. There's something magical about ringing in a fresh year surrounded by friends, food, and laughter. Last year, I had an extra reason to be excited. Mark, the guy I'd been dating for a few months. Things had been going well between us, and for the first time in years I felt like I had someone special to share the midnight kiss with. In the days leading up to New Year's Eve, we hadn't spoken much. Mark hadn't replied to a few of my texts, but I didn't push. I assumed the holiday chaos had him tied up. Instead, I poured all my energy into planning the perfect night. I spent hours cooking his favorite dishes and making sure every detail, from the decorations to the music playlist, was flawless. The party started off beautifully. Friends arrived, bringing their contagious energy and excitement. But as the hours ticked by and Mark still hadn't shown up, I started to feel uneasy. When he finally walked through the door, I felt a wave of relief, until I saw his face. Something about him seemed off. Mark greeted me with a brief hug, but his usual warmth was missing. His face was pale, his eyes distant as though he was somewhere else entirely. "Hey," he mumbled, barely making eye contact. I brushed it off, chalking it up to exhaustion or holiday stress, and led him into the lively room. As the party carried on, I couldn't ignore the tension building in my chest. Mark stood on the edges of conversations, rarely speaking and often staring at nothing. His presence was heavy, like a shadow lingering in the corner of the room. Whenever I approached him, his responses were clipped, almost robotic. Then there was the way he looked at me, not with love, not with frustration, just a cold, empty stare that sent shivers down my spine. I laughed it off in front of my friends, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Dinner was the highlight of the evening, and I had gone all out. As everyone took their seats, the energy in the room felt electric. I worked hard to make the meal perfect, and I hoped this moment would help ease Mark's strange behavior. We had a tradition of sharing our hopes for the upcoming year, a light-hearted, heartfelt moment that always brought smiles and laughter. When my turn came, I glanced at Mark, my heart swelling with hope. "I'd like to take more trips with my boyfriend," I said with a smile, feeling a little shy but excited about the possibility. The room cheered, and I felt a brief moment of pride and joy. Then it was Mark's turn. The air seemed to grow heavier as everyone turned their attention to him. He sat silently, his gaze fixed on the table. Seconds felt like minutes. Finally, in a voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, he said, "I can't do this anymore." For a moment, I didn't understand. The words hung in the air, suspended like a terrible mistake. I laughed nervously, thinking he must be joking, but when I looked into his eyes, I saw no humor, no emotion, just a blank, detached expression. Before I could respond, he pushed back his chair, the sound jarring in the silent room, and walked out. No explanation, no goodbye. Just like that, he was gone. The silence in the room was suffocating. Everyone stared at me, unsure of what to say or do. I managed a weak excuse and fled to my bedroom, shutting the door against the weight of their pitying stares. I collapsed onto my bed, tears streaming down my face. The night I had dreamed of had turned into a nightmare. My mind raced as I tried to piece together what had just happened. How could someone who seemed so perfect, so loving, suddenly turn so cold? The party outside carried on, but it felt like a world away. I sat there, consumed by a growing sense of dread. This wasn't just a breakup. It felt wrong, unnatural. Something about his behavior, his expression didn't feel like Mark at all. As the hours passed, my emotions shifted from heartbreak to confusion and then to fear. I replayed every moment we had shared, searching for signs I might have missed. But there was nothing. No fights, no coldness, just an abrupt, chilling silence. I tried calling him, texting him, but there was no response. It was as if he had vanished. Days turned into weeks and still there was no word from him. I began to hear whispers from friends. One claimed they had seen him earlier that evening, sitting alone in his car, staring blankly ahead. Another mentioned he had seemed distant and withdrawn for weeks before the party, though he'd hidden it well from me. Weeks later, I learned something that still haunts me. Mark wasn't the first person to behave this way. Another friend of a friend had experienced something eerily similar. Her partner had shown up to an event, acted cold and distant, and then disappeared without a trace. Late one night as I lay in bed, I thought back to the way Mark had looked at me during the party. His eyes weren't just empty, they were unfamiliar. Like someone, or something, else had taken his place. Even now, I can't look back at that night without feeling a chill. Was it really Mark who walked into my party that night? Or was it something darker, something that came into my life only to leave me with questions I'll never have the answers to? It was a night like no other, the last day of the century. The air was electric with anticipation, and the city buzzed with excitement. I had been waiting for this evening for months, a grand celebration in the largest tent I'd ever seen, with music from renowned bands and a crowd ready to dance the night away. The admission was steep, but it was a once-in-a-lifetime event. I wasn't going to let anything ruin it. Dressed to impress, I felt a surge of confidence as I made my way to the bank. I needed just a couple $100 to make the night perfect. The ATM was brightly lit, standing like a beacon against the dark street. I inserted my card, the machine whirred to life, and I could hear the faint rhythm of its inner mechanics. I selected $200 and hit the button. The streetlights, the ATM screen, even the faint glow from distant buildings. Gone. The silence that followed was deafening. My heart raced as I stood there, gripping the cold metal edges of the ATM. The machine had swallowed my card, and with the blackout, it felt as though time had stopped. I whispered a silent prayer for the power to come back. Seconds felt like hours, and then, with a soft hum, the lights flickered back on. Relief washed over me as the street regained its vibrancy, but when I looked at the ATM, my card was still missing. I pressed buttons frantically, banged on the machine, even tried to peek inside the slot. Nothing. It was as if my card had vanished into thin air. A growing unease began to creep over me. While I wrestled with the machine, a young man appeared. He was about my age, dressed sharply for the celebrations. With a casual smile, he walked to the ATM next to mine, inserted his card, and withdrew cash with ease. I stared, dumbfounded. "Did yours work?" I asked, my voice shaky. He glanced at me, puzzled. "Yeah, no problem. Is something wrong with yours?" I explained my predicament, hoping he'd offer some advice or assistance. Instead, he shrugged, offered a half-hearted, "That sucks," and walked away, counting his crisp bills. His indifference stung, but it was the faint smirk as he turned away that unsettled me. The ATM seemed to mock me with its silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, not just with the machine, but with the entire street. It was too quiet, too still. The festive atmosphere from earlier felt like a distant memory. I decided to call the bank's hotline, but my phone's screen flickered and died before I could dial. Frustrated, I looked around for help, but the street was eerily deserted. Where had everyone gone? I turned back to the ATM, determined to retrieve my card. As I pressed the cancel button one last time, the screen blinked, not with the usual menu, but with a strange, distorted image. It was faint at first, like static on an old television, but it grew sharper. A face, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes staring directly at me. My breath caught in my throat as the face mouthed words I couldn't hear. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the curb. The screen flickered again and the usual menu returned as if nothing had happened. "Get a grip," I muttered, but my hands trembled as I reached for the machine. Before I could touch it, the power cut out again. This time, the darkness was suffocating. A chill ran down my spine. I felt watched. Turning slowly, I scanned the street, but there was no one there. Yet the sensation of eyes bore into me, growing heavier with each passing second. I wasn't alone. Panic set in as I fumbled to activate the flashlight on my dead phone. My mind raced with possibilities. What if I was stuck here all night? What if something worse was waiting for me in the shadows? The sound of footsteps broke the silence. They were slow, deliberate, and coming from behind me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice quivering. No response. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped abruptly. I spun around expecting to see someone, anyone. But the street was empty. A distant laugh echoed, faint but chilling, like it came from nowhere and everywhere all at once. Desperate, I turned back to the ATM. "Please," I whispered, pressing every button in a frenzy. "Give me my card." The machine beeped once, then spat out a receipt with no card attached. The receipt had a single line. "Don't look back." My heart stopped. The words felt like a command, a warning, and I didn't dare disobey. Clutching the receipt, I walked away from the machine, keeping my eyes forward. The street stretched endlessly ahead, every step amplifying the tension in my chest. Then I heard it, breathing, labored, raspy, and unnervingly close. I quickened my pace, my shoes scuffing against the pavement, but the breathing matched my speed. I couldn't take it anymore. Against my better judgment, I turned. A figure loomed in the distance, shrouded in shadow. It didn't move but seemed to grow larger as I stared. The air around me felt heavy, charged with an unexplainable energy. I turned back and ran, the sound of footsteps chasing me now, relentless and inescapable. I reached the edge of the street, where the tense glowing lights promised safety. The music and laughter were faint but welcoming, a beacon of normalcy in this surreal nightmare. Gasping for breath, I stumbled into the crowd, expecting relief. Instead, everything froze. The people, the music, even the lights seemed suspended in time. My eyes darted around, searching for an explanation, but all I found were faces, familiar faces, the young man from the ATM, the gaunt face from the screen, even my own face reflected in countless distorted forms. A voice whispered in my ear, cold and detached. "You should have listened." The world around me shattered like glass. I was back at the ATM, alone, with the receipt still clutched in my hand. The street was silent again, the festive energy replaced by a suffocating stillness. My card was gone, and so was my chance to escape whatever had happened. The machine blinked one last time, displaying the words, "See you soon." I left without looking back, the weight of the night pressing down on me. To this day, I've never used an ATM again. Some nights I still hear the breathing, feel the eyes watching me, and every time I'm tempted to turn around, I remember the receipt's warning, "Don't look back." I remember it vividly, every detail seared into my memory. My sister had left for New Year's, leaving the house eerily quiet. Before she left, she'd explicitly forbidden me from touching her new silver silk dress. It wasn't just a dress. It was her prized possession, shimmering, elegant, and according to her, worth every penny of the fortune she'd spent on it. I couldn't resist. The temptation was too much. My heart raced as I opened her closet, the faint scent of her perfume wafting through the air. There it was, hanging there like forbidden fruit, glimmering under the dim closet light. My hands trembled as I reached out, hesitant, yet desperate. I knew it was wrong, but I convinced myself it would be harmless. Just one night. What could possibly go wrong? I gently unhooked the hanger, and the dress slid into my hands like liquid silver. It felt soft, almost alive, as if it was warning me of the mistake I was making. But I brushed the thought aside. This was my chance to shine, to bask in the elegance that dress promised. I swore to myself I'd be careful, that nothing would happen. Little did I know, I was setting the stage for a night I would never forget. Sliding into the dress felt magical. It clung to my body like it was made for me, its silky texture sending shivers down my spine. I admired myself in the mirror, turning this way and that, marveling at how the fabric caught the light. At the party, heads turned. Compliments poured in, fueling my ego. People I barely knew came up to me, their eyes wide with admiration. It felt like I was walking on air, basking in the glow of borrowed elegance. I avoided red wine, greasy food, and anything that could jeopardize the pristine fabric. I was careful, so meticulous, that I even chose water over champagne. Everything was perfect, until midnight. The countdown began, the energy in the room, electric. Everyone erupted in cheers and embraces as the clock struck 12. That's when he appeared, a guy I barely knew, holding a crimson drink in one hand, stumbling as he leaned in to kiss my cheek. In that split second, I saw it all unfold as if in slow motion. His foot caught on the edge of a rug, his balance faltered, and the glass slipped from his hand. Time seemed to slow as the drink flew through the air. A splash of deep red splattered across the shimmering silver. Gasps echoed around me as I stood frozen, staring at the ruinous stain spreading like blood on snow. My chest tightened, a sickening dread twisting my stomach. Panic surged through me. No, 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 I muttered, bolting to the sink. The party around me faded into background noise as I scrubbed and scrubbed, the cool water running over trembling hands. The stain only seemed to spread, its crimson hue mocking me. I tried soap, then baking soda, then anything I could find in the kitchen, but nothing worked. The silk seemed to absorb the stain, drinking in the red as if it were sealing my fate. My mind raced. What would I tell her? How would I fix this? I glanced at my phone, debating whether to call her now or wait. But I couldn't think straight. Every scenario played out in my head, each worse than the last. The rest of the party was a blur. Every laugh, every cheer grated on my nerves, amplifying the dread swirling in my chest. My anxiety turned the stain into a living thing, growing, pulsating, consuming the dress and my sanity. I avoided everyone, retreating to a corner, clutching my phone like a lifeline. Thoughts spiraled. Could I replace the dress? Would she notice? Could I pretend I knew nothing? The weight of guilt and fear felt suffocating, pressing down on my chest like a vice. As the night wore on, the realization hit me like a freight train. There was no hiding this. I had to confess. My sister would return in 2 days, and the thought of facing her without coming clean made my skin crawl. I stared at the dress, its beauty now tainted, and felt tears sting my eyes. The walk home was agonizing. Every step felt heavier than the last. Once inside, I stared at the stained dress lying lifelessly on my bed. My hands shook as I picked up the phone and dialed her number. The line rang, each tone stretching endlessly. She answered, her voice light and cheerful. "Hey, how's everything?" she chirped, oblivious to the storm brewing on my end. My words spilled out in a jumbled mess, my voice cracking with emotion. I need to tell you something, I began, swallowing the lump in my throat. It's about your dress. There was a long silence on the other end, a silence so deafening it made my skin crawl. When she finally spoke, her tone was cold, cutting through me like a blade. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice low and measured. I told her everything, my voice trembling as I recounted the night. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her disappointment was worse than any shouting match. The next morning, I took the dress to every cleaner in town. Each one shook their head, the stain's permanence a cruel reminder of my mistake. I spent hours searching online for solutions, calling specialty cleaners, even considering buying a replacement, but nothing worked. The stain remained, a scar on the fabric and on my conscience. My sister returned 2 days later, her face a mask of barely contained fury. She didn't need to say much. Her icy glare spoke volumes. The dress lay between us on the table, a symbol of broken trust. I tried to apologize, to explain, but my words felt hollow. She grabbed the dress, her knuckles white with anger, and left the room. I sat there, numb, the weight of my actions pressing down on me. The house felt colder, emptier, as if the tension had seeped into the walls. To this day, I can't look at anything silver without feeling a pang of guilt. That dress wasn't just fabric. It represented trust, respect, and boundaries, all of which I had shattered. My sister eventually forgave me, but things were never quite the same. The memory lingers like a shadow, a constant reminder of the consequences of my choices. Even now, years later, I can't shake the image of that crimson stain. It haunts me in my dreams, spreading, mocking, reminding me of that fateful New Year's night. It's a lesson I've carried with me, etched into my mind like the stain on that silver silk. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly be free of it, or if it'll always be there, a reminder of the night I crossed a line I should have never dared to approach. Don't forget to like this video to show your support. Comment below with your scariest experiences, if you dare. Subscribe to the channel for more haunting tales every day.